Technology makes things convenient. For most people, technology makes things convenient. But for people with disabilities, it makes things possible. And that's an important way to think about what we do as designers for designing the end state. And so your question about what does the future look like for hybrid, I'll just go back to what I said around options. Like, providing options is important. What the sweet spot is, this much online versus this much face-to-face, all online, I think in some respects, we're going to experiment with that, and it's going to be entirely contingent on the content, the subject matter. For example, do I want my plumber, my electrician, my surgeon, or my dentist to all learn online? Probably not. I probably would like them to have some hands-on experience. But that same could be said for business as well. What does work integrated learning look like when everything is virtually mediated, for example? So how do we balance those?
Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of human ingenuity. Clever, inventive, and original thinking. My name is Ken Tenser, curator of Say Hi to the Future and CEO of Spiderworks, a leading business consultancy for mid-market organizations and entrepreneurs globally. With me today is Dr. Robert Luke, CEO of eCampus Ontario, a learning platform that provides leadership to Ontario universities and colleges, promoting innovation and adoption of digital learning. eCampus Ontario's mission is to inform and shape Ontario's online system redesign and to support digital fluency and educational system evolution for all. Prior to his role as CEO, Robert spent 10 years in executive management as Vice President, Research and Innovation at George Brown College and OCAD University. His expertise is in human-centered knowledge media design, working at the intersections of education and information science to produce useful and usable technology to support education, health, and innovation systems. Like this video if you enjoy our show and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment with who we should interview next. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Good afternoon, Robert. Welcome to Say Hi to the Future. It's a pleasure having you on here today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ken. It's always great to see you and to be in the sense of your thinking.
Well, thank you for that. You know, we met years ago, and I believe it was through the Conference Board and the Council of Innovation and Commercialization. And I remember being in the room and you were speaking, and afterwards I turned to one of my colleagues and I said, you know, we're all thinking about today, and this guy's thinking about the day after tomorrow. And we were so impressed. You were talking about strategic foresight and design and the development of the masters at OCAD. So tell us a little bit about that part of your career, because we were a large room of innovators and we were really intrigued.
Well, I spent 4 years of my career, the 4 years prior to coming to eCampus Ontario, as Vice President Research at OCAD University. And there they have a program, as you just said, a Masters of Foresight, Strategic Foresight and Innovation. And that program is really fantastic. I look on it, many have said this as well. It's like the modern MBA, or the MBA that mixes business with design, and the design of business, I suppose. And they do that with a design lens. So there are many really good business schools who have integrated design into business, and for good reason. Design, the Design Value Index, as you will know, published some statistics a few years ago that design-focused companies outperform the S&P 500 by, I think, 230%. And that makes sense when you think about it, right? The deliberate deployment of design is a key way to ensure that the product or service that you want to build and or sell is going to resonate with the needs of the end user. But that program, I think, was really great to be around, because it has, obviously talented faculty and a lot of really smart students coming from like an incredible array of disciplines that are bringing to their mind. To your point, I think there was one student in one of the programs who was an actual architect, but was looking to get into the strategic foresight mindset, if you will. And the thing that I take away from that, or that I took away from that most, is the idea that futures thinking is important, and it's plural. It's futures, because we can set strategies and we can plan for contingency, but when we open up the world, it sounds like I'm talking about string theory almost, but when we open up the world to think about multiple paths or different types of futures and how do we plan for them, we build resiliency and the ability to extemporize, which is important, because well, if there's one thing we've learned in the last year and a half, it's the ability to extemporize on a number of fronts. And I guess the great thing about being aware of the SFI, or Strategic Foresight and Innovation Program at OCAD University, is that we now at eCampus Ontario hire them. We bring interns in through the SFI program, and we have hired a couple of the grads to work with us, because we have a research, evaluation, and foresighting practice as part of our mission to serve and support the sector.
Well, no, it's great to hear what you're doing. It's great to hear that you're bringing them in. I mean, I've met a number of the grads, and I've got to say, I mean, here I am on business degree number 3. I'm working on my doctorate in my 50s, because what else do you do in your 50s and go back to school for a doctorate? But I've said many times, and to many of the people that I've worked with, that if that master's had existed, I'll say decades ago, I don't want to tell you how many, I would have done there, because I think what you're seeing is that whereas in business school, and yes, some of the business schools incorporate a class in design thinking, if you will, I think that what you're learning is not just human centricity, but inspiration. What inspires and what moves people to act or think or believe in a certain way. And I think that really that is the essence of business success. If we can understand and tap or extrapolate that thinking or that belief system into how we operate a business or a not-for-profit or government for that matter, I think we're just way ahead.
I would agree with you. And really it gets down to understanding, what do people want or need? I mean, I think the iPad has only been with us for maybe a decade or so. I don't even remember. It feels like I've always had one. But if you had asked people, do you want this tablet device? They might not have said they want that, right? And that's a disruptive innovation. Insofar, I mean, you could go back to the Newton tablet,
Right.
Many years before. It was a little before its time, perhaps. But the iPad came along and people didn't really know about it. They didn't have a preconceived grammar of action by which they would think about it. Now we do. And now we understand a lot about, the touchscreen interface, which is a Canadian invention. And I think the idea that we can do these things and manipulate media in these ways, but fundamentally, one of the reasons why I think products like that are successful is because they tap into something that we need to do or want to do.
Right.
And I think like a good product without design will fail more likely than not. A good product with design will be a great product, because
Right.
we will be able to adapt the product in its design phases to really meet the needs of the users, even if those needs need to be anticipated in certain ways.
Yeah.
And I think design helps there as well. Like there's many concepts here. The skeuomorph is a great concept, which I love, right? The older technology grafted onto the present in order to scaffold one way of thinking into another. Those are excellent tools that we can use to start to telegraph how people might think of themselves as using a particular software, say, or
Yeah.
service or what have you. And the business schools have done a great job of this, of adapting and adopting the design methodologies, human-centered design methodologies of talking to people. Just asking them, would you use this? Under what conditions would you use this? Would you pay for this? Would you expect someone else to pay for this? You know, why would you want to use this? And understanding those motivations. So for me, I think it's design is something that I think a lot about, both from a methodological perspective, but also, I like to use things that work well, that function well. And, you know, maybe they even look great and they give me a frisson of joy when I use it. Everybody has the experience of software crashing on them, right? And that does not elicit the frisson of joy. But I think it at least, so depending on how the software crashes and what happens to it, you could, you can take something valuable and learn. When I used to teach human-centered design many years ago, I was teaching at the Knowledge Media Design Institute at the University of Toronto. And I used to start the semester with a game, bug versus feature. And we would talk about things like software things that people either liked or didn't like. And two that I'll use as an example, which are possibly, not possibly, but are obsolete now. One was a Netscape feedback agent. If you remember Netscape, one of the early browsers, really kind of defined the browser space in many respects. And then for a while there, so this would have been like 2003 or 4. So they got the good idea to get feedback from people. And so they would have this little automatic widget that would launch itself at random moments to say, tell us about your Netscape experience and how we can make it better. Really great feature. However, it was also a bug because in my experience with the Netscape feedback agent, 100% of the time, it crashed my browser.
Well, it was effective then. It was effective. It was reliable. I mean, you got to give it that. I think one of the things, before we move on, I really want to point out in this discussion, so many people talk about research and they all go back to the Henry Ford quote. If I had asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I've always said, nonsense to that. They would have said that they wanted to travel faster, warmer, and drier. So people know what they want. They might not know how to achieve it. Frankly, it's not the consumer or the customer's role. That is our role to achieve it. But research using human-centric design addresses just that. And really, it's up to us to translate their wants and desires to an experience or a product or service that's usable.
I agree. My mantra for the design of any product or service is it must be usable and useful. And it has to have some form of utility to it. And we talk a lot about research in this country. And it's important for us to know that as a country, we fund public funding for research is the highest in the OECD, or not the OECD, in the G7. And I think fourth in the world in the OECD. However, we're last in the G7 for business investment in research. And in that imbalance is a bit of a story where I think design can help. Because when we think about research, we think about discovery. We think about, I'm going to discover something new or invent something new, and that's good. Look at insulin is a classic example.
It just made the Walk of Fame this week.
Exactly. And everything about biopharmaceuticals, obviously is very popular right now for good reason, because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and science is helping us get out of this. And biological or biopharmaceutical research is based on the fundamental premise of scientific inquiry and discovery from what we know of as basic research right through to we could call it innovation or market opportunity. But one of the challenges that we have is when we think about research, only think about basic research. About 80, I think 84% of our public funding, highest in the G7 of per capita funding, goes to basic research. Now, basic research is TRLs 1 and 2. There's 9 technology readiness levels, and I think about these as technology readiness level 1. I've got an idea to launch a rocket. And technology readiness level 9, I'm ready to launch that rocket, actually with William Shatner on board, because space, it's the final frontier. But when we start to think about research as a span of activities, we have a better sense of what it takes to go from an idea to impact. And so let me unpack that a little bit with the space analogy. So TRL1, I've got some rocket scientists in a room, and some physicists and some chemists, and some computational modelers, and they design the rocket itself. By the time we get to TRL 3 and 4, we have to make something. We have to make a prototype. That's a fabrication. So now we're looking at mechanical engineering, but also the ability to literally fabricate something which is not necessarily the purview of the same, it's definitely not the purview of the same people who are the rocket scientists. It's somebody working in concert with them with a completely different path of education and a completely different job description. And that's what's key. Because, we want to see William Shatner on our rocket, by the time we get to TRL 5, we've got a marketing communications firm engaged to figure out, well, am I going to convince William Shatner to get on my, I think so. We've also got a fashion designer engaged because we want William Shatner and the rest of us on that rocket to look good for the press. By the time we get to TRL 6, we've also had, computer scientists and UI UX designers all throughout to design the instrumentation panel. The point of this is that, well, there's a couple of points. One, we need to understand research as a span of activities. And the OECD measures research by basic research, applied research, and experimental development. Basic research is TRL 1 and 2, applied research TRL 3 and 4, but experimental development is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The vast majority of activity to take that idea and make an impact of it. And it is in that span where designers, I think, have the most to add to any multidisciplinary, collaborative, problem-solving event, call it what you will.
Yeah,
and that is to help translate, use that word, Ken, which I think is important, to translate this idea into what it looks like for impact. And that impact could be a vaccine that has global potential. It could be a rocket that is launching. It could be a new computer like the iPad, or it could be a new piece of software that is going to run on top of that iPad. The point is that when we, particularly as we get out of applied research and into experimental development, the role of design is amplified because it helps to translate what might be into what can be, but most importantly, what can be and will be used.
Right. Well, and I think when you think about it that way, what I'm hearing is that human-centric design is a bridge between invention and innovation. It's the bridge between the spark and the in-market commercialization. So, absolutely critical. The one thing, Robert, I will add to your other story about the TRL 1 through 9 and what's required. I really think that you needed a publicist on that team, because it was great to have William Shatner up, but if somebody killed Captain Kirk, man, I wouldn't have wanted to be the brand that was responsible for that. But anyway,
one would hope they had a contingency plan in place for that.
I'm here today with Robert Luke, Dr. Robert Luke, CEO of eCampus Ontario, on Say Hi to the Future. Robert, we talk a lot about passion and savage curiosity. I mean, that to me is, those are the grounding factors in this show. And you obviously talk about discovery and human-centric design. Now you're the CEO of eCampus Ontario. You're the leading edge again. So to tell us a little bit about why the leap and what you hope to accomplish.
Great questions, Ken. I think when I was first asked if I was interested in the role, I obviously immediately saw the potential. My working hypothesis being that this thing called the internet might prove useful, and in fact, could prove useful for some time.
If Blockbuster had only thought like you, Robert.
I tell you, right?
They would have
I'm
bought
just
Netflix. Sorry.
exactly.
Please go on.
Well, and so I was recruited to the job during the pandemic. I think it was early on in the pandemic, and I have been an academic for 2.5 decades, working inside universities and colleges. So it wasn't necessarily natural evolution for me, but I immediately was struck by the opportunity, and not just the opportunity to help folks use the internet. I think that's pro forma in some respects. I have been involved in the design and development of internet-based technologies and education in particular since the mid-90s. Since 1994, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Northern British Columbia, which had a distance education mandate. I went there when it first opened up. I went into my third year. I think there was like maybe 200 students in the entire university that first year. And I like to joke that I was, graduate number 13 because I was like, last name Luke. There was like 12 people in front of me for the first time out. It had been around for a while, but it opened up a physical campus. And the internet in education was part of the mandate to use, tools for distance education. And early on, it was video conferencing. It was simple, TV lines working at a distance. And so that was normalized for me. The idea of working and learning others at a distance. And then we got into designing courseware, like actual, what would become learning management systems as we know them today, and content and markup for content. So everything from, programming the basic management systems that we use, but also, just functional HTML to make markup and hypertext annotations of texts work in ways that could leverage the potential of the technologies. And it was a very exciting time then. Netscape did their IPO. I remember when I was in, I think, fourth year. And for us working at the time, we were like, oh wow, this thing called the internet, it's really exciting. And not just the internet, which was the underlying infrastructure, but the World Wide Web, which was operative on top of the internet, if you will. So my point to saying that is I had a lot of, and have continued to have a lot of expertise and work in the area of designing of technology for people to get stuff done, healthcare, government, education, those main kind of public verticals that I've been interested in throughout my career. So the opportunity space was significant, but I also saw a great opportunity to help the sector to realize the potential of what this means, like what it means to do distributed learning or flexible learning or online learning or virtual learning at scale. Because it's really important for us to know that when we did collectively round about March 18th last year, decided that, we have to close our colleges and universities, we went from having online learning as something like maybe 10% of the professoriate do to something 100% of the people had to do. And there was obviously a big rush, and the sector worked really hard to, work together to make that pivot a success for the learners ultimately and the faculty in that equation. So we think of that as emergency remote teaching, and that fast jump into emergency remote teaching was successful because we were able to work together. And I think our opportunity now, and it was done in some respects, quickly, obviously, but without maybe paying as careful attention to the 3 decades of research that has been done on effective design of teaching and learning environments, because sometimes we just had to get stuff up and put it up as quickly as possible. Now, in the intervening time, we've gone back and we've been able to redesign that, and campuses are starting to open up. But I mention this because we have to make a distinction between emergency remote teaching and what high quality online, flexible, hybrid, whatever you want, looks like when it's done well at scale. And I think, when I've seen some data come through now that says institutions are planning for anywhere from 40 to 60% of their course offerings will be offered online. So that's 40 to 60% of their courses, or 40 to 60% of a course, because we've realized that there is an incredible opportunity to design well thought through, well-crafted, digital by design, as we like to say it, learning environments that can help people learn for the simple fact that they provide people with options. And options are important. This means options to take learning, to access learning anytime, anywhere, all the time, everywhere, to maybe disaggregate credentials into micro-credentials so that I can work a little bit and study at the same time, but still work iteratively towards credentials. And that I can do this if I'm living in a remote or rural environment, or if I have my children are at home and they can't go to school because there's a COVID outbreak, so I can't go to school or to either teach or learn. So I need another option to access the materials. All of these things are important and represent the opportunity space. And now, of course, I'm telling you what I'm thinking now, 12 and a bit months into the job at eCampus Ontario. At the time when when I started, it was like, oh, yes, this is a key opportunity and an opportunity for me to contribute to an important sector of our society and our economy in ways that I think can be meaningful. And eCampus Ontario, as a 5 or 6 year old organization at the time, was struck precisely because we as a sector realized that we need to be doing things to anticipate the future. And what we have over the last year is just some punctuated equilibrium, if you will, where we've had to rapidly evolve a bunch of different ways of doing things to kind of find our level that we will work on going forward. But most importantly, the opportunity space for me right now is thinking about what can we do to support learners, our faculty, the professoriate, and everybody who works in our institutions in order to be resilient and prepare learners for the future.
Well, I think what you're touching on is really important. I mean, one of the things that struck me, I was one of the major magazines, I've forgotten the exact one now, but talking about medical knowledge and the fact that it doubles every 73 days today, which means that, an undergrad medical student, by the time they hit midterms of their first year, everything's doubled. So it's absolutely impossible for us to learn enough during our 3, 5, whatever year stint in university or college that we need to. And, I see in my own business and my own, day-to-day that providing, as you were saying, education, learning insights as and when we need it it's absolutely critical. So really kudos on that. But the other thing that I'll say though is I think that, just like hybrid work, we're going to really have a good look at hybrid learning. Next week is particularly tough for me. I have to go to Paris. I have to teach executive MBAs about innovation. And I've got to tell you that after doing so much learning and teaching and whatnot, consulting online, I'm really looking forward to the face-to-face human interaction again. So I'm so in favor of hybrid learning and what you're doing at eCampus, but I really am interested in where that balance is going to come out.
Well, that's, everybody wants to know that. If I was to think about the current, thinking around the sector and society is there's, a lot of people thinking, oh, can't we just go back to the way it was on March 1st, 2020? And then there are those who are saying, I don't think we can ever go back to the way it was. That atavism is nice. Let's also be cognizant of what the pandemic has shown us with respect to disparity of access. And we might have the privilege of isolating, but there are many who don't. And we've really seen the pandemic underscore that people's lives have been disproportionately affected. And there are those already experiencing marginalization, and there are those whose marginalization has been further exacerbated. So I think we have to keep in mind that the current moment that we're in is one of possibility, yes, but in that possibility, we have to ask hard questions of ourselves about who's the possibility for? I'm reminded of a quote that's almost the obverse of that. The human, I think her name was I think the Secretary of State or something for the AODA way back in the late 90s, who said, technology makes things convenient. For most people, technology makes things convenient. But for people with disabilities, it makes things possible. And that's an important way to think about what we do as designers for designing the end state. And so your question about what does the future look like for hybrid, I'll just go back to what I said around options. Like, providing options is important. What the sweet spot is, this much online versus this much face-to-face, all online, I think in some respects, we're going to experiment with that, and it's going to be entirely contingent on the content, the subject matter. For example, do I want my plumber, my electrician, my surgeon, or my dentist to all learn online? Probably not. I probably would like them to have some hands-on experience. But that same could be said for business as well. What does work integrated learning look like when everything is virtually mediated, for example? So how do we balance those? What kinds of technologies, like through AR and VR, can we use to approximate some situations that actually remove some risk from the equation? So I might not want to be a surgeon, or a firefighter, let's say. So being exposed to AR, VR environments when things are happening might show me that, oh, I'm not cut out for this, or I've got to learn these other skills. So finding the balance, I think, is going to be key. But I think it's also important for us to understand that we are in it's an understatement, like a very significant shift in how we think as educators, right? I read early on in the pandemic an article, and the person said, virtual learning is not real learning. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I read the article, and the person talked about how much better it is to get in front of a classroom of people and talk and have a discussion. And I thought, okay, yeah, fair. Not like teaching is easy, but getting up in front of a class for a couple of hours after I've done my 10 or whatever years of education and I've written my books, it's not that it's hard, it's not that it's easy, but my point is getting up and just talking as the sage on the stage, as they said, is a little bit easier than being mindful to design a learning environment that has to be designed from the get-go so people have a path to go through. And so that mind shift, so that person who said virtual learning is not real learning had no experience, probably, with being a virtual learner or a virtual teacher, because they just weren't of the generation that had to do it. Whereas now we know this is what it means to teach and learn online. And here's where it can be useful. Here's where it's usable in a context. And here's where it can be most usefully designed. But the other thing I would think it would be useful commenting on is something you talked to about medical knowledge. And if it is doubling in such a fashion, what's the role of learning? Because I think what you're talking about there is the difference between transactional and transformational learning. Like, transaction means I'm learning a skill or a competency. I'm learning something that helps me do something today. If it's medicine, it's being a physician or a nurse or a surgeon or what have you, and learning how to resect an organ or something. If I'm a carpenter, it's learning how to frame a wall and make sure it's square, that kind of thing. Those are very, very important skills, and they're transactional in that sense. And education has a role to support and teach transactional skills. But the transformational side is also important, equally, if not more so. That what I've learned from learning the content, which may or may not be obsolete, is how I've learned how to learn. And that's a very important thing. I've learned that learning is an ongoing iterative activity. It's social. It's best done with other people, regardless of whether it's face-to-face or mediated. It's done within professional communities of practice through, the jargon is legitimate peripheral participation, but how do I learn with others? Like, you're an expert in innovation. Can I attach myself to you for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, whatever. And what will I learn from that? I'll have legitimate peripheral participation. I'm participating with a professional. It is peripheral to what you were doing, and I'm learning some legitimate skills that could be both transactional, but also transformational. But I will learn through, in this case, that's what the apprenticeship model is based on, which medicine has in common with trades, by the way, that they are apprenticeships. We just don't call them all the same things. That I am learning, these important skills, but also how to assess things, how to do a patient assessment, how to assess a building for is it level, plumb, square, or whatever. Is that patient really presenting all the facts, or do I need to do some additional uncovering? Like these are the subtle things that we learn that come with mastery of competencies and skills. And I think that, irrespective of the modality, online versus hybrid, like we all crave face-to-face interaction. Like we're hiding out behind our camera lenses for long enough. And I'm glad that we're starting to, the vaccine rollout is going really well. And I'm grateful and thankful for all of the scientists and healthcare workers who are supporting, a return to normalcy as we make it. But that return to normalcy, it won't be like it was before, and it requires us to think differently. And I mean, if anybody can think differently, it's people like you, Ken, who can think, what does the education of the future look like, and how best can we support as many people as possible to obtain the kind of education that they want and need?
No, absolutely critical point, and thank you for that. And when you said learn to learn, I've got to say that over the last few years through the pandemic, myself, my team, my colleagues, every time whether it's for students or CEOs, we're sitting there now and thinking, how are they going to react to this? I'm looking at you right now at 1 inch by 1 inch or whatever it is. This little picture on my screen. How are they going to react? How are they going to absorb? How are they going to filter? What are they going to be doing that I can't see, that they're going to be reading or typing or whatever it is? So I've really learned how to think through the micro. It's not the true meaning of micro learning, but I'll call it micro learning or the micro educational process. And jokingly though, but in prepping for next week face to face, I'm actually rethinking how people are going to take in information, in what size, in what group size, in what length of time. So, the constraints of online, I'll tell you in a couple of weeks, but I'm hoping that it's made me rethink and re-engage, in person, how learning will be. So it's, I hate there's very little good to take out of a pandemic, but I think that if we can learn about ourselves in interaction, that is something positive, and it is something positive that we can give back through learning and education and whatnot. So Robert, I want to thank you. We've been on with Dr. Robert Luke, CEO of eCampus Ontario. Just before signing off, eCampus Ontario, again, not to take a positive from something like the pandemic, but what you are doing has had this boost. I mean, it is, as you said, it's become a necessity. What is the future for eCampus Ontario? Where are we going to see you next?
Well, for us, we see incredible opportunity in supporting our members. We represent all public universities, colleges, and 4 of the 9 Indigenous institutes, so 50 members. And we see incredible opportunity in supporting them to do things at scale together that they might not be able to do individually, or where there's more advantage for them to do things collectively. We have what we call a platform support model that has 3 components to it. On the kind of the foundational layer is transmission. We look on putting in place the systems and services, software platforms that enable the next layer, which is transaction. People, organizations to engage with one another in order to get something done. And that could be learning, it could be a research partnership, It could be a work integrated learning experience in connecting others. And that leads to the third layer, which is transformation, which is really our goal in supporting an inclusive post-secondary education environment that supports the needs of all learners and does so in ways that helps the rising tide lifts all boats. I think about what the public spending before the pandemic was mostly healthcare. Healthcare is the largest budget line item in the provincial budget, in any provincial budget, I believe. I think it takes just north of 50% of program spending. And so I've said before, cast your mind back to March 1st, 2020. And on that moment, healthcare took about 51% of program spending. Now fast forward to April 1st, 2020, and we realized that that's not enough. And so if that is the case, long-term care needs to be funded better, dental care, mental health. If we need to devote more resources to that, where does the publicly assisted sector come in? And I'm not an economist, but we can look at prices or taxes as the ways in which we fund things that we want to do. And on the taxes side, unlikely that we're going to see a large allocation of tax-funded dollars into the sector. We have seen some. We distributed the virtual learning strategy, $50 million allocated by the provincial government to support virtual learning in the future, which is a historic and amazing investment that is funded almost 400 projects across the sector, doing amazing, truly amazing things. Shared content, open educational resources, shared software systems. So that transmission layer, site licenses that we could buy as a block. Rather than 50 organizations going out and buying something, why don't we buy as one? Because we'll get a lower price overall. And that's important on the prices side, because we don't want to just raise prices for learners. We want to attract other learners from other national and subnational jurisdictions, for sure. That's important. Can we do that in a way that's going to help the entire province? And can we work together at scale across the sector to reduce the cost of other things so that we can put more money into students, student bursaries, student mental health, the professoriate supports that we need to design high quality online learning environments. I think those are the ways in which we are really excited to serve and support our sector, trying to learn what platforms can we put in place, what systems, what services can we put in place that will help our 50 members succeed at scale, where doing it individually will be more difficult and or costly.
Robert, I think that's a phenomenal vision and mission, and I wish you the best of success. I can't remember who said it. I wish I could give the right attribution, but I was speaking at a conference a couple of years ago, and somebody said that knowledge is the crude oil of the 21st century, and it truly is, and learning is a conduit. So thank you so much for being on and sharing with us today.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's always great to see you and to have a discussion with you. I always learn a lot. You are an inspiration in what you do, and I'm quite envious. I'm envious of you for going to Paris, I guess I would say, but I'm also envious of your students who get to experience you in person and to be taught by a true master of innovation. So it's great of you.
Thank you for that. But I got to say, it's funny. I was. I don't know if this will go, but I was prepping the other day, and I realized how much reading I had assigned that I have to do this weekend. Again, going, man, my kids they're all in their 20s. Some are out of university, some of their masters. They're going, Dad, they're just going to hate you. Anyway, take care.
Thank you, Ken. Great to see you
soon. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.